The pleasure isn't about owning the person. The pleasure is this: having another contender in the room with you. Spoilers ahead. I wish I had come up with that quote, but I didn't. It was Philip Roth. And I know it because John Green cites it a lot. I can't think of a better quote to describe this film. It encompasses perfectly what it is trying to say. Calvin is a writer. He's got some issues. Like most great minds, there's a lot going on up there that makes things that regular minds find easy hard. The guy starts doing an assignment that his shrink gave to him, and boom, he manifests the perfect girl into existence. This is like a manic pixie girl turning real. Now, he notices that he can control her every move and aspect. Could you imagine being able to do that with your partner? I'm sure that we all have one or two things that we could change. Maybe he or she snores, or they could be taller or shorter. I don't know. But it becomes a slippery slope. Happiness, for example, is not something you can write, like be happy. It doesn't work like that. And the real question would be, why would you even want that? What's the difference between that and an AI chatbot? Going back to Philip Roth's quote, the pleasure isn't in owning someone, in calling them yours like a prized possession. It's not about holding them close and saying, look, you're mine. No, the pleasure is something far stranger and lovelier. It's in the moments when you're both in the same room and there's this invisible current between you, a shared spark, a connection that's just electric. It's the knowledge that here is someone who gets you, challenges you, keeps pace with your thoughts, and maybe even stays a step ahead. It's knowing that you've met a mind, a heart, a soul that matches yours. And that's the kind of beautiful, rare magic that no title or label could ever capture. That person doesn't have to be perfect. Perfection is unattainable, boring, and overrated. You don't want the partner that you've always dreamed of. You want a partner that makes you realize that they are far better than any dream because they are real. Real is messy. Real is complicated. With real, you have to put in the work, cry, get confused. That's what Calvin didn't get until he did. The thing about humans is that we are deeply ungrateful. He literally had a girl that was written by him, and he still didn't feel like that was enough. At some point, we have to stop and ask ourselves if perhaps we are the problem. At the party, Calvin bumps with his ex, and we get a nice bit of information. Nobody could reach the impossibly high bar that Calvin had set for his partners. And it's not even about elements such as cooking or looking good. He wanted the girl to love him even when he was consumed by his own work. He wanted to own the person, and since the pleasure isn't there, he was miserable. And it's expertly written how Calvin tries to write the quote unquote patches and end up making everything worse. It's like clipping a bird's wings to keep it from flying, but you end up clipping them so much that the bird doesn't even look or act like a bird. Calvin could even go as far as to make her bark, and still, that's not where it is at. At the end, the only rational and sensible thing to do was to set her free. The writing is so good that you don't even question too much the mechanics of her existence. At some point, I even thought that the movie was based on something real, like writing someone into existence was even a thing. That's how good it is. Either way, the whole thing was doomed from the start. There's no way you can have a true relationship if one of the parties has potential absolute control over the other. The only way I could imagine it working could be if he broke the typewriter and burnt the paper, clearly signing that he won't interfere. But he doesn't. He locks the paper and keeps the key in an easily accessible place. It briefly reminded me of the movie Click, which isn't a great one, but when Adam Sandler fast forwards through the unpleasant moments of life, he ends up missing out on a lot of life. If Calvin wouldn't let Ruby voice her opinions, be angry, be sad, want to live, then it won't work. Those arguments and difficult moments are what makes the relationship a thing. Yeah, you can fight and say mean things, but reconcile and then learn from that experience. I sound like a freaking shrink, but I'm being honest here, guys. As much as happiness contributes to the human experience, pain also does. I'd argue even more. Calvin didn't want to learn about Ruby. Perhaps he thought he didn't need to, since he wrote her. That's part of the brilliance of this film. It completely removes from the argument the possibility of someone else. Like, of course, there won't be anyone more quote-unquote perfect for him. Like, he literally wrote her. There are no what ifs. It's simply a critique on how we view our partners, and more specifically, how men view and write women. I also dabble in writing. I wrote a novel when I was in high school and never published it. The way I wrote the girl in that book was very one-dimensional. She was flawless, and that made it very bad. It almost makes it feel like women are only valuable or deserving of such profound love if they are absurdly perfect. When in reality, like Hannah Montana said, nobody's perfect. We shouldn't go for perfect, we should go for real. In terms of cinematography, it's good. It's shot like the kind of movies that I like, it's a weird thing to say, with a very simple style. It doesn't need a lot going on in that department when the story is already rich. The screenplay is awesome. Zoe Kazan, the girl who plays Ruby, is the writer of the film. Isn't that crazy cool? I've seen plenty of times directors and writers be actors, but having the writer star on the movie and have it directed by other people is something else. It's such an original, beautiful story and totally deserved to be turned into a film. Sure, it's a movie about idealizing someone, but it also tackles issues such as over-expecting from ourselves. The pressure the world put upon us to be something. That same pressure that Calvin felt from the world, he ended up putting on his girlfriend, imaginary or otherwise. Success can be a curse to some extent. I'm sure some people will wonder if Ruby was real in the context of the movie. And I'd say that Calvin actually thought so, and that's enough. In the very last scene, when Calvin meets this girl who looks like Ruby, we wonder if she's Ruby after being freed and choosing Calvin again. We won't know. The performances are stellar. The scene where Calvin forces Ruby to do all sorts of things is so sad and kind of scary. The rest of the cast does a commendable job. In terms of rewatchability, it's a solid 85% rewatchable. I could even go a bit higher personally speaking. Movies with a remarkable premise are a hard find these days, in the mainstream market at least. Basically, love is complicated. Who knew? Relationships are complicated. Who knew? Shrinks are there for a reason. And as always, thank you for watching. See you next time.